Sophia adjusted the stiff collar of her uniform. A wealthy and influential black entrepreneur is asked to prove her VIP ticket, only for everyone to be stunned when she reveals she owns the airline. They thought they were dealing with just another passenger, someone who did not belong in their world of luxury. Little did they know, the woman they sought to humiliate was the very owner of the company they worked for. This is not just a story about prejudice. It is about quiet authority, poetic justice, and the power of self-assurance. Before diving into this remarkable tale, do not forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more inspiring and thought-provoking stories. The vibrant hum of Skyport International buzzed around Camille Rivers as she strode through the terminal. Overhead announcements echoed, while the rhythmic clatter of luggage wheels and the low murmur of travelers created a symphony of organized chaos. Camille walked with purpose, her tailored charcoal suit an emblem of understated power. Her every step on the glossy tiles exuded confidence, the sharp click of her heels commanding attention. Some onlookers glanced curiously as she passed, their expressions ranging from admiration to curiosity, even suspicion. Camille had grown accustomed to these unspoken inquiries. Who is she? What is her story? She never stopped to answer, her focus set firmly ahead. The line for first-class check-in was brief, a stark contrast to the serpentine queues for economy passengers. Camille handed over her ticket and passport to the smiling agent at the counter. The interaction was seamless, marked by politeness on both sides. Camille accepted her boarding pass with a calm nod, her voice measured and steady. Every move radiated a woman who understood her worth. With her documents in hand, Camille made her way toward the gate, her thoughts drifting to the meetings awaiting her in Zurich. There she would finalize a groundbreaking deal, set to solidify her influence in the global aviation industry. The irony of flying first class on the airline she largely controlled did not escape her, yet Camille reminded herself, no matter how high you climb, there are always hurdles to overcome. As she approached the boarding gate for flights 4:15, the ambient noise of the terminal faded, replaced by her sharp awareness of the scene before her. The gate agent, a blonde woman with angular features and a name tag reading Lindsay Hart, was laughing with a colleague. The laughter ceased abruptly when Camille handed over her boarding pass. First class. Lindsay's tone carried an edge of disbelief. As her eyes flicked over the ticket, that is correct, Camille replied evenly, her calm demeanor unwavering. Lindsay hesitated, her gaze narrowing as she scanned the ticket more thoroughly than necessary. A momentary pause, stretched just long enough to feel awkward. Camille noted the faint smirk tugging at Lindsay's lips, her brows arched with something between doubt and condescension. May I see your passport as well? Lindsay asked, her voice louder now, drawing the attention of nearby travelers. Camille handed it over without hesitation, though she could not ignore the subtle tightening of her grip on the document. Lindsay scrutinized it, flipping through the pages with exaggerated care. Is there an issue? Camille asked, her tone firm, steel laced beneath her composed exterior. No, just verifying, Lindsay replied with a smile that did not reach her eyes. Returning the passport, her gaze lingered a moment longer before she added, in a voice dripping with feigned politeness, enjoy your flight. Camille stepped aside, her expression unchanging, but her senses were razor sharp. She caught Lindsay leaning toward her colleague, whispering something, just quiet enough to avoid being clear, but their muffled laughter was unmistakable. It was not loud but deliberate, designed to be noticed. Steeling herself, Camille walked toward the jet bridge, maintaining her composure despite the simmering storm inside her. She had encountered this kind of treatment before, the pointed questions, the subtle reminders that her success somehow needed to be validated. As she scanned her boarding pass for the final time, she noticed the gate supervisor nearby. His name tag read Robert Trent. Though present throughout the exchange, he had chosen to remain silent, his gaze conspicuously elsewhere. Once aboard the plane, the contrast was immediate. The first-class cabin exuded exclusivity, its plush leather seats and ambient lighting creating a cocoon of luxury. Camille placed her briefcase into the overhead compartment and settled into her window seat. She exhaled deeply, releasing some of the tension that had built at the gate. While the flight crew moved about, preparing for takeoff, Camille's thoughts lingered on the incident. Moments like this were reminders of the unspoken battles she faced, challenges not from rivals or market forces, but from assumptions and biases rooted in others' narrow perceptions of her place in the world. Her gaze shifted to the horizon outside, a quiet resolve building within her. This was not over, not by a long shot. As Camille Rivers settled into her seat, she noticed Lindsay Hart step onto the plane. Lindsay's expression faltered briefly as their eyes met. Camille held her gaze, her face calm and unreadable, offering no reaction beyond a steady look. Lindsay quickly turned away, her movements stiff, as she busied herself with the pre-flight routine. Camille reached for her tablet, opening the agenda for her upcoming meetings in Zurich. Yet no matter how hard she tried to focus, the encounter at the gate lingered in her thoughts. It was not just the inconvenience, it was the principle. The quiet indignity of having her place in first class, questioned, treated as though it were a mistake or anomaly, gnawed at her. She had worked tirelessly to reach this point, overcoming countless barriers, and moments like these were reminders of how far society still had to go. Pulling out her phone, Camille quickly typed a message to her assistant. Make a note. I need a full report on the staff at gates 415. There is an issue we need to address. She hit send and let her fingers rest on the screen for a moment. Exhaling slowly, this was not just about her, it was about anyone who had ever been dismissed, questioned or judged unfairly, before they even had a chance to prove themselves. As the plane began taxiing down the runway, Camille leaned back in her seat, her gaze fixed on the endless horizon outside. She had learned long ago that not every battle was fought with raised voices or heated confrontations. Sometimes the most potent weapon was quiet, deliberate action, and this was a battle she fully intended to win. The plane ascended smoothly, and the soft chime of the seatbelt sign turning off signaled it was time to relax. Camille folded her hands in her lap, looking out at the serene expanse of clouds. Despite the tranquility outside, her mind was anything but peaceful. The events at the gate replayed in her thoughts, each glance and whispered remark etched into her memory. Camille prided herself on her composure. She had built a career on staying poised in the face of disrespect, but the sting of being singled out lingered. It was not just personal, it was a reminder of the broader challenge she faced as a successful black woman, navigating spaces where her presence often provoked skepticism or even hostility. Adjusting her scarf, Camille opened her tablet again and scrolled through notes for her next meeting. The deal she was set to finalize in Zurich was a significant one, an investment in an innovative aviation technology company that could revolutionize sustainable travel. The work was exciting and forward-thinking, demanding her full attention, but today her thoughts could not escape the sting of earlier events. Her focus was interrupted by a flight attendant, a young man with a polite smile and professional demeanor. Miss Rivers, he said, placing a linen napkin on her tray table. Can I get you something to drink? Champagne, perhaps. A cocktail, just water, please. Camille replied with a faint but polite smile. He nodded and moved on, his demeanor courteous but distant. Camille noticed the slight shift in his posture as he addressed her, the overly formal tone tinged with unease. It was subtle but familiar, an invisible barrier that seemed to persist, no matter how gracious she was. Returning to her tablet, Camille attempted to immerse herself in the meticulous projections her team had prepared, but moments later, her focus was disrupted again by the unmistakable sound of Lindsay's voice, low but distinct, coming from the galley nearby. I just do not get it, Lindsay said, her words accompanied by the faint clatter of dishes. She is sitting there like she owns the place. A quieter voice responded, seemingly trying to temper Lindsay's tone. But Camille could not make out the reply. It did not matter, the implication was clear. Camille's jaw tightened as she stared at her tablet, the numbers on the screen blurring. She had dealt with this before. The insinuations that her presence in certain spaces was somehow undeserved or unnatural, but what made this moment sting more was its deliberate nature. Lindsay's remarks were not casual, they were calculated barbs, just loud enough to be overheard. Camille considered calling over the lead flight attendant to address the behavior, but she quickly decided against it. Confronting Lindsay directly, here and now, would only hand her more attention, more power. Instead, Camille made a mental note to follow up with Ethan Clark, the CEO of Zenith Airways, as soon as she landed. This issue was not just about Lindsay, it was about addressing the systemic bias that enabled this kind of conduct. As she returned to her notes, a soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "Excuse me, Miss Rivers." Camille looked up to see an older woman seated across the aisle. Her kind face was framed by graying hair, swept neatly into a bun, and a pearl necklace gleamed under the cabin lights. "Yes?" Camille asked, her tone calm but curious. The woman leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. As Camille Rivers sat back in her seat, the older woman across the aisle leaned forward slightly, her expression kind but cautious. "I just wanted to say," the woman began softly. "I saw what happened at the gate, and again, just now, it was not right. You handled it with such grace." Camille's expression softened, her guarded demeanor momentarily giving way to warmth. "Thank you," she replied, her voice measured yet genuine. Camille was not used to strangers acknowledging moments like these. Most people chose to avert their eyes, too uncomfortable or indifferent to speak up. The older woman nodded, her face breaking into a faint, reassuring smile. "I just thought you should know. Not everyone agrees with what they are doing. Some of us see you for who you truly are." Camille's lips curved into a small but grateful smile. "I appreciate that," she said simply. The woman leaned back into her seat, and the brief exchange left a lingering warmth in the air. It was not much, but it was enough to remind Camille that not everyone chose to look the other way. As the flight continued, Camille's resolve grew stronger. This was not just about her, it was about the countless others who faced similar indignities every day, often without the power to fight back. She thought of the young professionals, the frequent travelers, and the families, people who deserved better, but rarely got the chance to demand it. Camille picked up her tablet once more, this time drafting an email. Her fingers moved swiftly across the screen as she outlined her concerns with precision. By the time the plane touched down, the email would be ready to send, leaving no room for excuses or delays. Her message to Ethan Clark, the CEO of Zenith Airways, was concise but deliberate. It recounted the events at the gate, the whispers on board, and Lindsay Hart's unprofessional conduct. The email concluded with an unequivocal demand. "This is not about a personal grievance, it is about a systemic problem within your organization. I expect a thorough response and tangible action." Satisfied, Camille tucked her phone away and prepared to disembark. Her movements were deliberate, her posture unshakably composed. She was the last to leave the plane, stepping onto the jet bridge with measured grace. As Camille walked toward the terminal, a familiar figure came into view. Ethan Clark stood at the end of the jet bridge, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit. His expression was a mix of professionalism and unease. "Camille," he greeted, his voice warm but tinged with urgency. "I did not expect to see you here, but after receiving your email, I thought it best to meet you in person." Camille stopped a few feet away, her gaze steady but curious. "Ethan," she replied coolly, "I was not aware you were in Zurich." "I was not," he admitted, gesturing toward a quieter corner near the terminal. "Can we talk privately for a moment?" Camille nodded, following him to a secluded lounge area. The bustling noise of the terminal faded as they took seats across from each other, a small table between them. Ethan leaned forward, clasping his hands together. "First, let me say how sorry I am for what happened," he began, his voice earnest. What you described is unacceptable, and I take full responsibility for addressing it." Camille crossed her legs, her demeanor calm but assertive. "Acknowledgement is a start," she said, her tone measured. "But I am looking for more than apologies. I need accountability and meaningful change. This was not an isolated incident. It is a reflection of a culture that allows these biases to thrive." Ethan nodded solemnly. "I understand that. It is why I wanted to meet you personally. After reading your email, I launched an immediate investigation into the incident. What we have uncovered so far is troubling." Camille tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing, troubling how Ethan hesitated. Choosing his words carefully, "It appears Lindsay Hart was not acting entirely on her own. We found an email sent to her the morning of your flight, instructing her to thoroughly scrutinize your ticket and passenger details." Camille's expression sharpened. "And who sent the email?" Ethan Clark continued, his tone tense. "The email was sent anonymously, but we have traced it to our internal corporate network. Someone deliberately targeted you." Camille's expression remained impassive, but her thoughts raced. "You are telling me this was intentional, not incompetence or lapse in judgment?" Ethan nodded gravely. "The wording and timing make it clear it was not random. We are still investigating, but all evidence points to deliberate sabotage." Camille leaned back, her gaze fixed on Ethan. "So this is not just about a gate agent or a supervisor," she said coldly. "This is someone within your organization, trying to undermine me, possibly even discredit me." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, but did not deny it. "We are doing everything possible to identify the source. I promise you, Camille, we will get to the bottom of this." Camille tapped her fingers lightly on the armrest of her chair, her mind already strategizing. "I trust you will," she said, her voice sharp with resolve. "Because if you do not, I will." Ethan straightened, clearly understanding the weight of her words. "We will keep you updated on the investigation, and I will personally ensure Lindsay Hart is dealt with appropriately." Camille stood, smoothing the front of her suit jacket. "Good, keep me informed, Ethan, and remember this is not just about one person, it is about setting a precedent." As Camille left the lounge and stepped into the waiting car, her thoughts churned. The revelation of an internal plot did not shock her, it added fuel to her already simmering resolve. This was not about mere ignorance or bias anymore, it was sabotage. The city lights of Zurich shimmered through the car window as Camille stared out, her mind racing. She had faced calculated challenges before, but this felt different. It was deliberate, insidious and far-reaching. Camille pulled out her phone, opening a secure messaging app. She quickly sent a message to her team of private investigators. "Someone thinks they can undermine me quietly. Prove them wrong." The following days in Zurich were a whirlwind of high-stakes meetings and negotiations. Camille navigated boardrooms with the precision of someone who knew her value, commanding respect even from her harshest critics. But behind her poised exterior, Ethan's revelation weighed heavily on her. She had long understood how isolated incidents often tied into larger systemic issues. This situation was not just personal, it was emblematic of a culture that enabled misconduct to thrive. After her final meeting of the day, Camille returned to her hotel suite overlooking Lake Zurich. The still waters glimmered under the city lights, a stunning contrast to the turmoil in her mind. Sitting at her desk, she opened her encrypted laptop to review the report from her investigators. The findings were thorough, and it did not take long to pinpoint a name. Robert Trent, the gate supervisor on duty during her flight. Camille's eyes narrowed as she read. On paper, Robert's record was spotless, but his emails painted a different picture. A pattern of subtle yet unmistakable bias emerged. Particularly in his correspondence with Lindsay Hart, he had suggested scrutinizing certain passengers, often using coded language to express prudence without drawing overt attention. Worse still, the investigation revealed a deeper issue. Robert had been in communication with an executive at a rival airline. The messages were encrypted, but their timing and frequency were damning. It seemed Robert had been leaking insider information, positioning himself as a silent saboteur. Within Zenith Airways, Camille leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled in thought. This was not just about her experience, it was about a calculated effort to undermine the company she had invested in. And it was time to confront the truth. The next morning, Camille arrived at Zenith Airways' Zurich office. Ethan Clark was already waiting for her, in a private conference room, his expression pale with tension. Across the table sat Robert Trent. His composed demeanor betrayed flickers of unease as Camille entered Miss Rivers. Robert said with a stiff nod, his voice calm but strained. Camille did not acknowledge the greeting. Instead, she took her seat, her gaze icy and unrelenting. Ethan cleared his throat, breaking the heavy silence. Robert, we have gathered here to address some troubling findings regarding your conduct, particularly during flights 10, 4:15. Robert's brow furrowed in confusion, or an attempt at it. I am not sure what you mean, he replied, his voice carefully measured. Camille slid a printed summary of the investigation across the table. Her tone was cold and precise as she spoke. This report details your communications with Lindsay Hart, as well as your encrypted correspondence with an executive at Summit Airways. Robert hesitated, his hand hovering over the document. This is absurd, he stammered. I have not done anything wrong. Camille leaned forward, her gaze piercing. Let me make this clear, Mr. Trent. We have timestamps, emails, and patterns of behavior that paint a very different picture. You orchestrated the incident at the gate, using Lindsay Hart as your pawn. And you did not stop there. You have been feeding insider information to our competitors. Robert's face reddened, his composed exterior cracking. This is a misunderstanding, he insisted, his voice rising. I was following standard protocol. Protocol? Camille interrupted sharply. Since when does protocol involve targeting passengers based on personal bias or leaking confidential data to undermine the company you work for? The room fell into silence, heavy with tension. Ethan finally spoke, his voice firm. Robert, the evidence is clear. Your actions have violated company policy and the law. Effective immediately, your employment is terminated, and you will be facing legal action. Robert stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You can't do this, he shouted, his composure unraveling. You are letting her dictate how things are run. Camille met his outburst with calm disdain. This is not about me, it is about integrity, something you clearly lack. Moments later, security arrived to escort Robert from the building. As he was led away, Camille turned to Ethan. This is not just about one person, she said. It is about the environment that allowed him to thrive. I trust you will make the necessary changes. Ethan nodded, his expression grave. You have my word. As Camille stepped into the waiting car, she allowed herself a small moment of satisfaction. The battle was not over, but she had taken the first step in dismantling a toxic system. This was not just personal, it was about setting a standard that no one would dare undermine again. Camille Rivers took her seat, placing her briefcase neatly on the table in the Zenith Airways Zurich office. Ethan Clark cleared his throat, his tone formal and measured. Robert, Ethan began. We have called this meeting to address some serious concerns regarding your actions, specifically your conduct during flights 4:15. Robert Trent's brow furrowed as he feigned confusion. I do not understand, he said cautiously. What conduct are you referring to? Without a word, Camille slid a printed copy of the investigative report across the table. Her voice was calm but carried an icy precision. This document outlines your communications with Lindsay Hart as well as your exchanges with an executive at Summit Airlines, Camille stated, care to explain. Robert's hand hovered over the report, but he did not pick it up. His face reddened as his composure began to crack. This is absurd, he stammered. I have not done anything wrong. Camille leaned forward, her gaze piercing through him. Let me be very clear, Mr. Trent. We have emails, timestamps, and a clear pattern of behavior that paints a different picture. You orchestrated the incident at the gate, using Lindsay Hart as your pawn. But it did not stop there. You have been leaking confidential information to our competitors. Robert's face turned pale, but he made one last attempt to defend himself. This is a misunderstanding, he protested, his voice rising. I was just following protocol. Protocol, Camille interrupted sharply, her tone controlled but cutting. Since when does protocol involve targeting passengers based on personal bias or leaking internal data to sabotage the company that employs you? The room went silent, the weight of her words settling over everyone present. Ethan, who had been quietly observing the exchange, finally spoke. Robert, we have thoroughly reviewed the evidence. There is no misunderstanding here. You violated company policy and federal laws. Effective immediately. You are terminated and legal action will follow. Robert shot to his feet, his chair scraping noisily against the floor. You can't do this, he shouted, his voice breaking with desperation. I have worked for this company for over a decade, and now you are letting her dictate how things are run. He gestured angrily toward Camille. Camille met his outburst with an unflinching gaze. This is not about me, she said coolly. It is about integrity and accountability, two things you clearly lack. Moments later, security entered the room to escort Robert out. As he was led away, Camille turned back to Ethan. This is not just about one bad actor, she said firmly. It is about addressing the culture that allowed him to thrive. I trust you will ensure the necessary changes are made. Ethan nodded, his expression serious. You have my word. Over the following weeks, Camille's actions sent ripples throughout Zenith Airways. Robert Trent's dismissal was only the beginning. The company initiated a full internal audit, uncovering additional instances of bias and misconduct that had gone unchecked. Camille worked closely with the executive team to implement sweeping reforms, including mandatory anti-bias training, stricter oversight, and a new anonymous reporting system for employees. The news of Robert's betrayal and Camille's decisive actions quickly became a hot topic within the aviation industry. Passengers and employees alike began sharing their own stories, inspired by Camille's refusal to stay silent. One evening, back in her Manhattan penthouse, Camille sat by the window, gazing at the glittering city skyline. The events of the past weeks had been draining, but they had also reaffirmed her sense of purpose. This was not just about her experiences, it was about creating a legacy that demanded better from the world. She opened her notebook and began to write. Every act of resistance, no matter how small, chips away at the foundations of prejudice. Change is slow, but it begins with someone willing to say enough. Camille closed the notebook, a faint smile touching her lips. There was still so much work to be done, but for now, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The shadows that had long been overlooked were now exposed, and the light of accountability was starting to shine through. As Camille leaned back in her chair, her phone buzzed, breaking the peaceful silence. It was a message from Ethan Clark. Camille, thank you again for your leadership. The reforms you have championed are already making an impact. I would like to meet next week to discuss further changes. Your insight has been invaluable. Camille allowed herself a small smile as she read the message. The fight was not over, but the progress was undeniable. She was not just dismantling the old system, she was building something new in its place. The story of Flights 415 leaked to the media not long after Camille Rivers returned from Zurich. Initially, it was framed as another tale of discrimination, a gate agent unfairly scrutinizing a black passenger's first-class ticket. But as more details came to light, the narrative evolved. Reports of Robert Tread's sabotage and his covert ties to Summit Airlines added intrigue, and Camille's involvement as both the target and a major stakeholder in Zenith Airways catapulted the story into national headlines. Camille, by nature, preferred to operate behind the scenes. She believed in action speaking louder than words. However, the mounting public interest demanded a response. After careful consideration, she agreed to sit down for an interview with a well-respected journalist known for handling systemic issues with nuance and depth. The studio lights were bright, though tempered by Camille's steady, composed demeanor, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit. She exuded calm authority as she faced the interviewer. "Miss Rivers," the journalist began, "you found yourself at the center of a significant controversy involving Zenith Airways. Could you share in your own words what this experience has been like for you?" Camille took a moment, her hands resting lightly in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was measured yet resolute. "This is not just about me," she began. "It is about a culture that permeates many industries, a culture that questions, undermines, and dismisses individuals based on biases rather than merit. What happened during that flight was a symptom of a much larger issue, and it is one that demands systemic change." The journalist nodded, leaning forward. "Some have described your response as calm but commanding, while others have critiqued it as too corporate. How would you respond to those perspectives?" Camille's lips curved into a faint smile. "I understand that people interpret events differently," she said. "For me, it is not about reacting in the moment. It is about ensuring that the change I pursue is lasting. Anger might win the moment, but strategy wins the war." As the interview aired, Camille's composed response garnered widespread praise, further cementing her reputation as a leader who balanced grace with determination. Amid the growing interest, her assistant called her one evening, excitement clear in her voice. "Camille," the assistant began, "you won't believe this. I just got off the phone with an executive at Summit Airlines. They are interested in discussing a partnership, and possibly more." Camille raised an eyebrow. Summit Airlines, the same rival implicated in Robert Trent's sabotage. The irony was not lost on her schedule. "The meeting," Camille replied, her tone unreadable. "Let us hear what they have to say." A week later, Camille sat in a sleek conference room overlooking the Chicago skyline. Across the table sat Summit Airlines executives. Their expressions, a blend of nervousness and anticipation. They presented their proposal, a merger that would consolidate their market share and expand their reach in international travel. Camille listened intently, her face a mask of calm professionalism. When they finished, she leaned forward slightly. "Before I consider anything," she said, her tone cool but firm, "I need to know, did anyone on your team direct or encourage Robert Trent's actions?" The room went silent, the air grew heavy with tension. One executive shifted uncomfortably, his gaze fixed firmly on the polished table. The hesitation was all the confirmation Camille needed. She did not confront them directly, then and there. Instead, she left the meeting with a polite but non-committal response. Back in her office, she picked up the phone and called Ethan Clark. "Ethan," she began, her voice steady, "I have no interest in working with Summit Airlines, but I am interested in ensuring their tactics are exposed." Over the following month, Camille worked quietly with her legal and PR teams to release a detailed report on the findings of Robert Trent's sabotage and its connections to Summit Airlines. The report was factual, precise and devoid of sensationalism. The fallout was immediate. Summit Airlines faced public backlash, legal scrutiny, and a steep decline in consumer trust. Meanwhile, Camille emerged from the ordeal not only unscathed, but stronger, her reputation as a leader who demanded accountability and integrity that was solidified, making her a force to be reckoned with in the industry. Weeks later, Camille sat aboard a private jet, en route to her next venture. The events surrounding Zenith Airways and Summit Airlines felt like a lifetime ago, but their lessons lingered. With a notebook open in her lap, Camille began to write. Power is not about control. It is about the ability to create change that outlasts you. As the plane climbed higher, Camille looked out at the endless horizon, her thoughts full of possibilities. She was not just fighting for herself, she was fighting for a world where no one had to prove their worth before it was seen, and she was just getting started. The hum of the engines was steady. As Camille leaned back in her seat, the leather felt cool beneath her fingertips. Though her next project awaited her in Atlanta, her mind was not on the city ahead or the opportunities waiting for her. Instead, she reflected on how far she had come and how far she was determined to go. Camille Rivers reflected on the whirlwind of the past month as she leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen lightly against the edge of her notebook. The fallout from the Summit Airlines report had been far-reaching, more so than she had anticipated. While the rival airline struggled to recover from the exposure of its underhanded tactics, Zenith Airways had seized the opportunity to establish itself as a leader in corporate reform. Media coverage had shifted from scandal to progress, and Camille's name had become synonymous with change. It was not attention she sought, but she understood its significance. Her voice now carried weight, not just in boardrooms but in public discourse, and she was determined to wield it wisely. A week before her current flight, Camille had received an invitation to deliver the keynote address at a global business ethics conference in Atlanta. The organizers wanted her to speak about her experience with Zenith Airways and her broader insights into systemic reform. Public speaking was not Camille's forte. She preferred quiet action over the spotlight of a stage, but something about this invitation felt important, like an opportunity to drive meaningful change. As the plane began its descent, Camille felt a ripple of anticipation. This conference was her chance to shift the narrative, moving the focus away from the controversy and toward the lessons it offered. She did not want to be seen as a victim or even just as a reformer. She wanted to inspire others to take action in their own industries, to challenge what was wrong and build something better. The conference hall was grand but understated, its high ceilings and sleek design reflecting the event's professional tone. Business leaders, activists and policymakers filled the room, their low conversations humming like background music as they awaited her appearance. Backstage, Camille stood before a mirror, adjusting the lapel of her blazer. Her assistant Nora hovered nearby, her voice warm yet firm. "You have got this," Nora said, her tone encouraging. "Just speak from the heart." Camille nodded, her reflection calm and composed. She had spent days meticulously crafting her speech, approaching it with the same precision she brought to her business dealings, but as she stepped onto the stage and saw the expectant faces in the audience, she knew she needed to trust her instincts. The applause quieted as Camille approached the podium. She took a steadying breath and began, her voice strong and measured. "When we talk about leadership, we often focus on power, influence, and success." She started, but leadership is about more than that. It is about responsibility, the responsibility to challenge what is wrong, even when it is uncomfortable, and to push for change even when it is inconvenient. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "My experience with Zenith Airways was not unique," she continued. "It is part of a larger pattern, a culture that exists not just in aviation, but across industries. It is a culture that questions the presence of those who do not fit the expected mold, and it is a culture that won't change unless we demand it." Camille then shared the story of Flights 415, not as a personal grievance, but as a case study. She detailed the investigation, the reforms, and the unexpected revelations about Summit Airlines. She emphasized the importance of accountability, not just for individuals but for organizations, and the need to address bias at every level. "Change does not happen in boardrooms alone," she concluded, her voice soft but resolute. "It happens in the small decisions we make every day, in how we treat our colleagues, our customers, and ourselves. Leadership is not about control, it is about creating a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive." As Camille stepped back from the podium, the audience rose to their feet in a wave of applause. Gratitude surged within her, not for the recognition, but for the chance to make a difference. That evening, Camille returned to her hotel room exhausted, but fulfilled. The keynote had sparked meaningful conversations throughout the conference. Attendees approached her afterward to share their own stories and seek her guidance, a reminder of why she had fought so hard for those who had not yet found their voices. Settling into a plush armchair by the window, Camille's phone buzzed. It was an email from Ethan Clark. Subject line: Progress Update. Camille. It read, "The reforms are already making an impact. Employee satisfaction scores are up, and we have seen a surge of positive feedback from passengers. Thank you for pushing us to be better." Camille allowed herself a rare moment of pride. The journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but the results were tangible. She set her phone aside and reached for her notebook, her pen gliding across the page. Leadership is a journey, not a destination. Every step forward is a step towards something greater. As the city lights twinkled in the Atlanta skyline, Camille closed the notebook and leaned back, a quiet smile on her face. There was still much to do, but for now she let herself savor this small victory. Camille Rivers sat quietly in her Atlanta penthouse, a faint smile playing on her lips. She did not know what challenges lay ahead, but she felt ready as she always had been. For Camille, the horizon was never an end. It was a beginning. The weeks following the business ethics conference passed in a blur of meetings, travel, and the quiet satisfaction of progress. Camille found herself busier than ever, but the reforms she had championed at Zenith Airways continued to yield results. Reports of improved workplace morale, increased passenger satisfaction, and growing industry respect filtered back to her through formal updates and informal conversations. Yet even as she focused on the present, Camille could not shake the feeling that something bigger was on the horizon. Her intuition proved correct when, during a rare, quiet evening at home, she received an unexpected call from Ethan Clark. "Camille," Ethan began, his voice calm, but carrying an undercurrent of excitement, "I have something significant to discuss. Are you free to meet in Chicago this week?" Camille glanced at her packed calendar. Despite the demands of her schedule, Ethan's tone intrigued her. "What is this about?" she asked, leaning back in her chair. "It is best discussed in person," he replied cryptically. "Let us just say, it is an opportunity to reshape the industry on a scale we have never attempted before." Her curiosity piqued. Camille agreed. "Fine, let us set it up," she said, already rearranging her commitments in her mind. The Zenith Airways corporate office in Chicago was as sleek and imposing as Camille remembered. She was ushered into a polished boardroom, where Ethan was waiting, with a large portfolio spread across the table. His expression was serious but tinged with anticipation. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," he said, gesturing for her to sit. Camille took her seat, her gaze sharp. "You have got my attention. What is this about?" Ethan slid the portfolio toward her. "This," he began, "is the blueprint for a merger that could redefine the aviation industry. Zenith Airways is in talks to acquire Summit Airlines." Camille's eyebrows rose slightly, though her expression remained composed. "Summit," she repeated, her voice even. "The same airline that orchestrated sabotage against us." "The very same," Ethan admitted, his tone neutral. "Their recent scandals have left them vulnerable. They are struggling to recover, and their board is desperate for a lifeline. We are in a position to acquire them on highly favorable terms." Camille's fingers brushed lightly against the edge of the portfolio as she considered his words. "And you think bringing them under Zena's umbrella is the solution?" Ethan nodded. "It is more than just a business move. It is an opportunity to dismantle their toxic culture from the inside out and set a new standard for the industry." Camille opened the portfolio, scanning its pages. The proposal was thorough, outlining potential synergies, operational efficiencies, and long-term benefits. Yet as she read, her thoughts turned to the larger implications. A merger of this magnitude was not just about financial gains. It was about power, perception, and the ability to drive meaningful change. Closing the portfolio, she folded her hands on the table. "It is ambitious," she said finally, "but it is also risky. Summit has a reputation for cutting corners and prioritizing profit over people. Integrating that kind of culture into Zenith could backfire." Ethan nodded, clearly anticipating her hesitation. "That is why we need you," he said earnestly. "You have already proven your ability to navigate difficult challenges and implement real change. With your leadership, we can turn this merger into a transformation." Camille leaned back, her gaze thoughtful. The proposal was tempting, not just for its potential financial upside, but for the chance to influence the entire industry. Yet the challenges were undeniable. I will need time to review this thoroughly, she said. If I agree, it won't be for appearances. It will be to ensure we are building something better. Ethan smiled, a hint of relief in his expression. That is all I ask. Back in her penthouse that evening, Camille spread the documents across her desk, poring over every detail. The numbers made sense, and the strategic benefits were clear, but her focus remained on the cultural shift. The merger promised or failed to promise. Her thoughts drifted to Robert Trent and the sabotage that had nearly derailed her. She remembered the whispers on flights 415, the quiet judgment she had endured. These were not isolated incidents, they were symptoms of a deeply ingrained mindset that pervaded not just Summit Airlines, but much of the aviation industry. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from her assistant Nora. Quick update. Received another thank you email from a Zenith employee. They are loving the new changes. Thought you would want to see it. Camille opened the forwarded email, her eyes skimming over the heartfelt words of gratitude. It was a reminder of why she fought so hard. Not for accolades, but for the people who deserved better. As she looked back at the merger documents, Camille's resolve hardened. If this deal was going to happen, it would be on her terms, with a vision that prioritized integrity over profit. Her next steps would not just shape Zenith Airways, they would set a precedent for the entire industry. Camille Rivers read through the message of gratitude once more before setting her phone aside. It was not accolades that drove her. It was the knowledge that her work could make a tangible difference for those who deserved better. Turning her attention back to the proposal on her desk, Camille's resolve hardened. If this merger with Summit Airlines was going to happen, it would happen on her terms. The following week, Camille returned to Chicago for a meeting with Zenith Airways executive board. The room buzzed with anticipation as top leaders waited for her decision. Camille entered with her characteristic calm confidence, a single document in hand, the counter-proposal she had carefully crafted herself. Taking her seat at the head of the table, she placed the document in front of Ethan Clark. I have reviewed the merger proposal. Camille began, her voice steady but firm. And I have conditions. Ethan leaned forward, intrigued. Let us hear them. First, Camille said, the merger will include a complete overhaul of Summit's leadership. Anyone complicit in their unethical practices will be removed. Second, we will establish an independent task force to oversee the integration, ensuring transparency and accountability at every level. And third, the public narrative will not focus on acquisition. This is not about swallowing a competitor. It is about building a new industry standard. The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. Ethan nodded slowly, a hint of admiration in his gaze. Agreed, he said. With Camille's conditions in place, the merger moved forward. The process was painstaking, requiring months of negotiations, restructuring and carefully coordinated messaging. But under Camille's leadership, the transition became more than just a business deal. It became a model for ethical leadership. As Summit Airlines operations were integrated into Zenith Airways, Camille made sure every decision reflected the values she had fought so hard to uphold. Employees underwent extensive retraining, company policies were rewritten, and passengers were reassured that the changes would benefit everyone. For Camille, the merger was not an endpoint. It was a new chapter, a chance to create a legacy that extended far beyond profits and market dominance. She was not just reshaping an airline, she was reshaping an industry. Months passed and the merger was officially complete. The aviation world buzzed with speculation and curiosity, watching as Camille Rivers took a hands-on role in overseeing the integration. Under her leadership, the process became a masterclass in transparency, ethics and innovation. One of her first moves was to establish the Aviation Equity Task Force, a diverse coalition of employees, industry experts and consumer advocates. Their mission to address bias, improve workplace culture and foster accountability. The task force held public forums, collected anonymous employee feedback, and proposed sweeping changes, many of which Camille implemented without hesitation. The public narrative around the merger shifted. Dramatically, what had begun as skepticism evolved into admiration for its execution. Zenith Airways, once a symbol of traditional corporate culture, became a beacon for progressive change in the aviation industry. Camille was not content to oversee these changes. From afar, she traveled to hubs across the country, meeting with employees, hearing their stories and sharing her vision. At a town hall in Dallas, she stood before a room of flight attendants, ground staff and pilots, speaking candidly about her experiences. "I know what it feels like to be questioned, underestimated and dismissed," she said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "And I know many of you have felt the same. My promise to you is this: we will build an airline and an industry that sees your worth before it questions your place." The applause was deafening. As Camille looked out over the crowd, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. No business deal or financial milestone had ever brought her such purpose. Not everyone embraced the changes, however. A vocal minority of employees resisted the new policies, viewing them as unnecessary or overly progressive. Camille also faced criticism from some within the industry, who accused her of prioritizing ideals over profits. The tipping point came when an internal report revealed that a small group of managers at a major hub had been sabotaging the new initiatives. They had ignored complaints and actively undermined reforms. For Camille, this was a test of her resolve. She flew to the hub personally, holding a series of private meetings with employees and confronting the resistant managers head-on. Her message was clear: there will be no tolerance for actions that undermine the company's values. When news of her visit leaked, it sent a powerful message across the aviation world. Camille Rivers was not just leading from the boardroom, she was enforcing change at every level. 2 years after the 415 incident, Zenith Airways stood as a transformed company. Employee satisfaction was at an all-time high. Passenger complaints had dropped significantly, and the airline had reclaimed its place as a leader in the aviation industry. The Aviation Equity Task Force had evolved into a permanent advisory board, influencing policies across multiple airlines. Camille Rivers' name had become synonymous with ethical leadership and resilience. Her journey from being a targeted passenger to a transformative leader had inspired countless others to confront systemic issues in their own fields. The tables had turned. Camille Rivers had not just stood up for herself, she had sent a powerful message that no one should be judged by appearances. And Zenith Airways did not just learn a lesson, it revolutionized its policies, proving that change begins when someone takes a stand. What do you think about Camille's response? Let me know in the comments below. Do not forget to hit that subscribe button for more stories that challenge the status quo and inspire justice. If you enjoyed this, give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and stay tuned for more powerful tales coming your way. See you in the next one.